Welcome to the Lamp Burners Guild with me, Titania Page. I'm so excited to kick off this episode with a song from our honored guest, Matthew Clark.
My friend Chris has a wife and a daughter. He works nights at the local paper, and the songs that he writes clear the scales from my eyes every time. But if I hadn't told you, you'd never have known there is endless unseen good. Fame is a spotlight good for blinding a man, but the Lord counts each hair on each unfamous head, and He keeps you like a secret, your beautiful secret life. Now I imagine she thought it was worthless, that little widow who gave her last coins, but she could not have known that the poor heart she'd warmed was the Lord's. And so the universe keeps on expanding, 'cause maybe that's how much room it will take to store all the stories, all the well-hidden glories of grace. And this song could go on forever, endless verses the Lord only knows. The best tales begin in the quiet, like breath kissing Galilee's hills. My sister, she never has married, but she pours out her life for the poor. She tells me the names of all the daughters and sons that she adores. But if she hadn't told me, I'd never have known there is endless unseen good. Fame is a spotlight good for blinding a man, but the Lord counts each hair on each unfamous head, and He keeps them like a secret. Yes, He keeps you like a secret, your beautiful secret life.
How can you not just love this song? Welcome again to the Lamp Burners Guild. My name is Titania Page. We are a Christian creative community gathering artists, storytellers, musicians, and creatives to inspire hope and awaken wonder as we await Christ's return. Now, we meet in Memphis, Tennessee, but we're bringing our gatherings, our moods to your ears through this podcast. I'm so excited for you to be here, especially if you're struggling with the topic of validation. As an artist, sharing your art is such a vulnerable thing to do. And in our very trigger-friendly world, it's hard to find peace as you're starting this artist journey, or maybe you've been doing it for a while and now you're trying to pivot to something new. God is always keeping us on our toes, right? This conversation with Matthew Clark is so generous, and so I'm providing you here the highlights of our conversation. But if you want the 1 hour long, unedited, raw conversation, you can watch the video of this interview on our YouTube channel, Lamp Burners Guild. But if you are new to the gem that is Matthew Clark, let me introduce you. He is a singer, songwriter, and storyteller from Mississippi. He has recorded several full-length albums, including a Bible walkthrough called Bright Came the Word from His Mouth and Beautiful Secret Life. And we just heard one of the songs from that lovely album, my favorite hyper-fixation song from Matthew Clark right now. And so join us in this, oh my gosh, authentic, meet you right where you're at conversation as we dive into the topic of feeling validated as an artist. Let's listen. All right, Matthew, I'm so glad that you joined me again so that we can really pick up on this conversation of validation, like our desire as artists to feel validated in what we're doing. And when we were just hopping on the call, you really brought up a really great point of how art is just so undervalued. Mm-hmm. Like, why do you think that as we try to enter into creativity, because really God is creative, right? And we're his kids, and we don't question why we have brown eyes or blue eyes, and we don't question why we have brown hair or black hair or whatever, but we question our desire to be creative, and our Father is creative. So like, what are some of the reasons you think we feel, undervalued, or like we shouldn't enter into creativity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is that we're always looking for ways to and things that can we can quantify, that we can measure, that are measurable, which is another way maybe of saying things that we can like control and manage. And if we can control it and manage it, then it makes us feel like we're in control. And if we're in control, it makes us feel like we're safe and we're going to have what we need. But there's something weird about art that is not, you can't quite do that with art. It's not something you can get all the way around or control or pin it down. In that sense, art is more like relationship than it is like a mechanism or a machine. And I think in some ways that's kind of threatening.
It is. It reminds me, now I'm not going to say the title of it, and I think anybody just listening will understand. It reminds me of when a certain novel came out and it got picked up to be a book and all these different things. Even within the church, even though the book had like this is an example for you if you don't know, they're like, I've seen in the church where people have tried to use creativity to express something holy. And the thing about creativity is you're always going to take a risk, because there's always a risk it's misunderstood. And sure. You can't make somebody understand your art. You can't make somebody resonate with your art. So there's that, like, do I take a risk and try to share this important and valuable, like, because I saw people in the church, like, just cut it down, like, just shut it down before they even, like, looked at it. Like, we heard a lot of people say, like, high leaders say that, oh, condemn this book because it's talking about this or it did this a certain way. But then I took a step back and I wanted to see for myself what was inside, and like, is it true? Is that how it's being portrayed? And you can take this example really with anything. I feel like, of course, there's always, solid theology. And I think there's no threat really if you are reading your Bible. If people are reading their Bible and they're trying to connect to God. So I looked at this, piece of art, and I actually saw a lot of good things in it. And there's just, what the point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't feel safe at all to make art, because especially in our social media world, even spiritually in some circles, there's such a, you can do this, but you can't do that. You can express like this about God, but you can't express like that. Or even certain art mediums that are condemned. And I think that, like you said, a lot of it comes down to control, like wanting to feel like you're in control. And I think, like that's just not the way adventure, relationship really works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are your thoughts on that? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if you want to feel really safe, then you do algebra maybe. Because you can make everything kind of equal out like you want. But in relationships, you're always like, the thing that makes relationships work is vulnerability and availability, and Tolkien talked about writing Lord of the Rings, and he said, when I put this thing out in the world, I'm opening my heart to be shot at. And he said, like, I have to get ready for people to say, what is this junk about hobbits and elves? And of course, tons of people have said that. And he knew that he had to get ready for that. It was a vulnerable thing to do. And art is the kind of thing that is more like entering into a relationship with another person and saying, here's my heart, here's the things I care about, and I'm trying to make something out of this, and I can't control what you're gonna think about it or feel about it. And how am I gonna navigate all of that? Am I gonna get really mad when people don't like it? Am I gonna close off and stop making stuff? Am I gonna retreat? There's so many different probably things, but ultimately I think art making is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's and if you enter into it wanting to use art to kind of control people, that's called propaganda, right? Propaganda is when you make art in order to control other people. Or sentimentalism is even that. If I use art to make people feel the things that I want them to feel so that I can benefit from that somehow, that's so there are I think a lot of the dangers of art are also in a lot of ways the same dangers of bad relationship.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so good. And I love what you said about being vulnerable, like being ready to expect like the misunderstandings and possibly even the rejection. And so that leads me to the first question I really had, like thinking about your own experience. What do you think artists should expect? We're talking maybe to the person who's just starting something, or maybe they're starting something new, pivoting into something new, trying something new. Or maybe it's the seasoned artist that's going to launch something a little different than they have before. Like, what would you say they should expect from others when they tell other people about this art that they're making?
Well, I think it is normal to expect that it may not make sense. One of the difficult things about being a person versus being a machine is like, part of what we're always trying to do is make some invisible thing inside of us that only we know about, and like bring it out and then hand it to you. I'm trying to make what's going on inside of me known to someone other than myself.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do. It's very likely that other person will be like, I don't, what? Or you won't, or you'll say like I'm trying to do right now. No,
I totally get it.
To say, and then you'll think, okay, that didn't work. Maybe let me say that a different way. Oh, that didn't work either. Let me try that again.
Maybe they should expect trial and error. That's
a great
trial and error.
Expect, and don't be too hard on yourself when you don't get it right the first time. You may have to try some different versions of it, like drafts.
We'll be right back with our conversation. But right now, I want to give you a little gift. Laura Love is a poet that I've recently met through the Lamp Burners Guild. We didn't know each other, but we got connected from both being participants in the Memphis Arts Moot, and then me opening up my home monthly for these moots. Her poetry has been such a blessing. And I know you're gonna love this one that she calls a work in progress. Have a listen.
I have a couple of poems to share tonight. One is, it came from a writing prompt from a writing group I just went to this week. And I was surprised at what came out of it, and it blessed me. So I wanted to share that. So the writing prompt was, what is something you learned this past year? In the moment, it seemed like nothing. Certainly not enough to count, not enough to make a difference, not enough, but it cost me plenty. Angst over the mountain in front of me, self-doubt and recrimination, and oh, the fear of failure and of pain, the Band-Aid ripped off kind, the wound laid bare kind, the awake alone in the night kind. What kept me there, pushing on in the deep cost, not allayed by any gains? A kind of grace, that thing that perches in the soul, the one with feathers, the one that never stops singing, dauntless and indomitable, it sings me on. It must have a clearer vision than I, clearer and more far-reaching, for now I begin to see, sprouting into daylight, the shoot of promise, revealing the growth that was hidden in the soil. Now I begin to see on the horizon the destination I have been aiming for, but also, just beyond, another mountain. That is okay, because the thing in the soul, the one with feathers, has grown stronger in the mountain air, and now its voice that never stops singing rings out all the more.
What a beautiful poem about persisting by the grace of God through our struggles. As we turn back to our conversation, I asked Matthew about this often overlooked reason we struggle to persist in our art. Let's listen. Here's a very peculiar point to ponder. Now, this is a quote from my friend Christina Patterson. She teaches the Bible, and she was speaking, the context here, she was speaking on why can't you finish something you start, or why is it so hard to try something new? And so here's her quote. You think to yourself, I just want to eat healthy, start a business, go on more dates with my husband. But what you're actually doing is potentially breaking generational cycles of disease, poverty, and broken homes. You're not just making plans, you're taking territory. And with that, you better believe comes some opposition, end quote. And I'll leave the link in the description to this video where I took that quote. But what do you think about like art as actually spiritual warfare?
Yeah. Well,
in terms of like what we should expect when we're trying to do our art,
Yeah, well, one of the ways that I feel like I've come across that most is just feeling like an idiot.
Yes.
Just feeling like I care about this, but I feel stupid for caring about this. I feel like I shouldn't care about this, like it's not valuable. And I'm looking around me and everybody is climbing all these other ladders, and I don't really care about those ladders, but everybody says those things are important. And I don't know, it's like, and so I feel like one of the very subtle ways, at least, that works for me is just having to say, okay, I've got a lot of voices in my head saying this is so dumb. But I think I think this does matter, and I'm going to just do it anyway, even though I don't feel like it. Again, if it's true that art is in some sense a way of naming the preciousness of relationship and people, then it makes sense that that's going to get opposition, that evil beings are going to want to draws away from that. Also, I think about how abuse works. And like the way that abuse works is you want to get that person off by themselves away from their friends. Right? And so that they don't have anything to compare the lies to. That makes sense. You can mess with somebody's head if you get them isolated.
Yeah.
And you can just be telling them stuff and they're like, well, I guess that's true. I don't know. And so
it's kind of weird. Like you can do that with social media too. Like with the way the feeds are made, like you can be essentially in this weird echo chamber that's not real. It's very manufactured. You can for example, I think one way is that like believers could be on media and thinking, okay, people feel this way about the family or this way about kids or this way about truth, but actually couldn't be. You actually get outside and you actually engage with people and things are different. But yeah, there's such a way. Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying, with that.
So one of the things that art making in some sense calls for, especially as a Christian, understanding that God is Trinity, and you've got things like wherever there two or more are gathered. And I was just reading in a commentary last night. He talks about in the Gospel of John how what you always see demonstrated is that you've got learners or disciples, people who are learning from Jesus, but there's always other learners around. They're never learning all by themselves. They're learning with other people. And art ultimately is the kind of thing where you're always wanting connection. You're always saying, I want somebody to hear this song or read this book I made, or here's this thing I'm interested in and I want to talk about it with somebody.
Yes. It's like your joy isn't consummated until you tell somebody or invite somebody else in. It's like that C.S. Lewis quote, we have to let somebody else know for that joy to be complete.
Exactly. I love that phrase, make my joy complete. By entering into this same thing that is giving me joy, and so that we can have joy together about it.
What do you do with these messages that tell us that our creativity really isn't important? It's more about bringing or being productive, for spiritually or in the church. Like, what has that looked like from you? Like, what inspiration from God's word and just your relationship have you drawn to see the fruit of being who God created you, being in exercising your creativity? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I can't remember who said this, or maybe I've seen it in multiple places, but the idea that Jesus is so inexhaustibly beautiful and rich that in order for his church to communicate him, like it takes billions of people like to communicate this one person, and it takes every little variation of person to be able to communicate some other aspect that someone else doesn't. So everybody brings to the table some little piece of that image and makes it available within the world. And what that means is that everybody there might be sort of guidelines and patterns that repeat, but for each individual person, there's going to be some very peculiar way that you make the treasure of Jesus's presence available that only you do. And so you might find your own style of doing that. Or your own particular gift that's not like somebody else's gift. And so I think in our Western kind of post-industrial culture, we want to just like run everything through this machine that just stamps like
Yes.
This is what Christian looks like. Like we stamp this little mold and everything. And actually what Paul says is don't be conformed, right?
Oh, that's so good. Yes, don't be conformed. Yeah, to the image.
And I remember a pastor I had one time saying that the word there is schema, I think, and schema means to press something into a mold. And so you can imagine like this factory machine that's just like spitting that out. And he says, well, instead of doing that, you just bring yourself and offer yourself as a living sacrifice with personality and interests and gifts. And instead of being smushed into a pigeonhole or a little mold and spit out the other side that looks just like every other little mold.
Yeah.
You let God and the community God has situated you within, through that matrix of relationships, let something really beautiful and unique be birthed. And in some sense, like don't get ahead of yourself and say, I'm going to look just like this, or I'm going to look just like that. Like it's a process of trusting God, saying, I don't know exactly where this is going to go, what you long for that creative ride, you know.
Ah, that's so wonderful. That's a really good point. And I feel like this is what the church needs, because when we have eyes to see and appreciate the variety and the diversity of the church, and I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about personalities, I'm talking about, backgrounds. Like when we can start to see and appreciate the differences of something, but also have the eyes to see what's foundationally still true. And let's just, for example, just looking at other believers that I know they love the Lord, but they might not have the same convictions as me or the same passions as me. They might have a personality that absolutely gets on my nerves, but like they are still my brother and sister. They're still from the same litter, so to speak. They're children of God, and having eyes to appreciate and welcome those differences, that's what makes us more compassionate and more gentle, like to be able to speak truth and love to those outside the church. While the subject of differences and diversity is fresh on our mind, I'd love to share a short story from Cindy McMillian, a regular at our monthly moots. I think you'll really be blessed and touched by this brief story she shares with us. Have a listen.
I used to be a school teacher, so these pieces refer to that time when I was. Okay. All right, and it's a couple of little pieces, and they have to do with kids, they have to do with courage, and they have to do with God. First one is called I'll Hold Your Hand. Today I was teaching computer skills in one of my elementary schools, and my last session was with a kindergarten teacher. As part of the training, I showed the teacher how to access an online video collection, and she wondered aloud if there were any clips of Martin Luther King Jr. There were, and together we watched him as he made his famous I Have a Dream speech. At the end, I said to her, I wish things were really like that. She said, yes, I know. I wish color didn't matter, but there are other prejudices too that I wish people didn't have. We talked for a long time, and she told me the story of her daughter who had sickle cell anemia. When the little girl, now 10, was only 6 years old, she had a stroke that had left her confined to a wheelchair and with very limited vision. She had been and still is a bright girl with a big vocabulary and an ability to understand and express a lot of things, but she's not treated the same anymore since the stroke. This mother talked about the pain in her own heart being almost too much to bear, and that she wanted parents every day to treat their children as though it were their last day together. It was all I could do not to lose total control and just sob. I don't think there's any worse anguish than seeing your child suffer, and you could tell this mother's heart had been shattered. But in the past 4 years, she and her daughter have squared their shoulders and begun to reach out to other people. to give speeches on heart disease and stroke and the need to donate blood. One of their recent talks was to a group of students at the university, at the end of which her little girl said to them, "We're going over to the blood donation place now. If you want to give blood but you're afraid, I'll hold your hand." Then this sweet lady said to me, "I know it's not politically correct to talk about Jesus, but I'll tell you, without him, we never would have made it through this." God, I'm so glad she has him and that she wants to say so out loud. That's the first one.
I just love the honesty of this story and just how life-giving it is, and how it invites us to see things as they are and then be the hope for something better through how we live and how we welcome others. And as we return to our conversation, Matthew and I discussed just how important it is to have others with you on this journey in your artistry. Let's listen.
The way humans are made and the way the world is made is that you can't generate life from within yourself. I mean, you know this every day because you have to eat food to stay alive. So life comes from outside of you in. And you mentioned, and so the whole pattern of this is that the Word becomes flesh and dwells among us. And then he offers himself as food from heaven. He's manna from heaven. So we take the life of Christ into us, and that's what keeps us alive. So in other words, don't feel bad about needing validation. Because you do actually need someone else to come alongside you. You can't keep a hold of reality all by yourself, and you shouldn't expect yourself to be able to do that. That's why that abuse paradigm works so well, is to get somebody off by themselves, because without the help of the other people around them to help them see what's real, they will lose track of reality. And the other thing I would say is that I have this idea of authority has really helped me. And who are the voices that you give authority in your life? And as an artist, I need, if I need help understanding where my art is or what my gifts are, I don't take my short story to the math teacher. Right. Not because there's anything wrong with math, but because the math teacher has authority in math. He doesn't have authority in short story writing or fiction or fantasy. I want to be sure and take my pearls to the people who have authority in that arena. And then, because people are going to tell you things you don't want to hear, and if they are a person of authority in that area, then you need to listen. Even if it's unpleasant, you need to actually listen, or you'll never get any better. But if somebody who does not have authority in that area tells you something bad, you can take it with a grain of salt and say, maybe I'll listen to that, maybe not. Is it a good point? Is it not a good point? Because I've had people tell me things that were really, really painful and miserable to hear. But I recognize, like, this guy is a top-notch Nashville producer. He knows what he's talking about. I don't like what he said, but I need to listen to it, or I won't. And then I've had people who don't really like art that much anyway, and they told me something I didn't want to hear, and I said, I don't need to get too hung up on that, because this isn't their area of interest or authority anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's perfect sense. I'm glad you added that. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I should ask you more about that. I should poke that bear some more.
That's been helpful to me to kind of clear some things up as far as like, which things do I need to give weight to? Which voices do I need to give weight to? Because I do need validation and accompaniment and help and encouragement. I desperately need that.
How have you gathered a healthy authority or a healthy group around you to speak into you and your art? And has that looked like just friends, or has that looked like investing in like a musician camp, or, hours with somebody? What does that look like for you?
Well, a couple of things. One part of it is just the Lord has provided. I sort of prayed for that, and the Lord in his way, just wove together different connections and friendships. And there are people like Lancia Smith or Malcolm Guite, or through the Cultivating Project or the C.S. Lewis Foundation or Rabbit Room, like a lot, or Anselm Society out in Colorado, like a lot of these different people that God has slowly over a decade or more put in my life, or even you know, to like reinforce that calling or that gift or those desires. And so part of that is like the Lord has just done that as I've prayed for it and tried to keep an eye out for what he's up to. And then the other was to be proactive and seek out communities that seem to be doing the things that I was interested in. So like going to Hutchmoot with the Rabbit Room in Nashville, like going to those conferences, and which is, you know, can be an investment. It's a time investment, money investment. Going to C.S. Lewis's conference, Oxbridge, you know, I didn't have enough money to do that. So I applied to be like a volunteer and be on their work staff, and I got a scholarship, or Anselm Society and Imagination. So getting involved in things where the kinds of things you care about are happening and the kinds of people that care about the things you care about are gathering. Like if you don't have that around you automatically, which you probably don't, like going and finding those things, or what's a lot harder is creating them yourself. You're doing that with Lamp Burners, like, which blows my mind, like that you're Lamp Burners, that you're like putting a flag in the ground, like making that happen where you are.
Thanks, man. We're not, like, when I look at your guitarmanship, I'm like, wow, this guy is incredible. And for me, like, I have a tendency to feel like I have to like conform to like, okay, before I start having shows, I need to be really good at playing guitar. And I know to some extent, yeah, you do need to respect your craft. But at the same time, if you don't ever start doing it, like, will you ever really do it?
Gosh, yeah, that's a really interesting discussion, because I feel like there are a lot of, when we look out and we see all these polished professional things, and that can create a lot of pressure and make it hard to feel like, well, what's even the point? But I do feel like the way that you get better at something is not by waiting till you're better to start trying. Like you have to be like really bad at something for a long time. Yeah. But you have to just care about it. You have to care about the thing that you're doing more in some sense than you care about whether you measure up. Like you have to just love something. I mean, and I think one of the best things you can do as an art maker is to just start making art. You just got to start doing it. And there's this quote that I go back to again from G.K. Chesterton, and he said, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Like, hey, do it, be really bad at it, but at least start doing it, and you'll get better. You need to just keep making stuff and keep making stuff. And again, get people around you. Be okay to be a beginner. Get people around you of authority who can encourage you, who can validate you, who can say, keep going. There's some potential here. Like you're not there yet, but do another draft. Do another draft. But it is vulnerable, and you can't necessarily control everything or everyone's responses. But
that was a good question. I want to ask you.
Don't let that keep you from starting.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just feel like I forget to ask you this because my brain is like, psh. But anyways, how do you, because this is something I saw that you do at Hutchmoot that I thought, wow, it takes incredible humility and groundedness and love to, when you are good at something, how do you protect yourself from being somebody who is cutting others down or making them feel less than? Like, instead of building them up, because there's so many opportunities and so many even little slick ways we can like cut somebody down or be throwing shade. How do you protect yourself from that? Because that's one of the things I really admired about you when I met you at Hutchmoot.
Well, part of it is like, hey, remember how much mercy you've been shown? Like, and you're going to go out there and stomp on somebody else, you know? So that's part of it, is just remembering, man, the Lord has been so unreasonably good to me. And the other thing is realizing like there's plenty of pie to go around. Like I don't have to like defend my pie.
Yeah.
And so like your talent or your gifts are not a threat to me. Like God is a God of abundant life. He's not going to run out of love or gifts or goodness. And so like, I don't have to hoard that as if I'm going to run out, or if this somehow like, if you get a little bit of the pie, I'm not going to have as much. Yeah. So like, I don't have to look at a room full of people and feel like their talent is somehow a threat to me, you know?
Yeah.
And that really frees me up to just enjoy their talent, whatever it is. Good. Like, and say like, oh, that's awesome. Look what the abundance of God has poured out on you, and the abundance of God has poured out on you. And so like, we don't have to feel threatened by each other, or we're not actually competing.
No, we're not. And that's one of the beautiful things about God's economy, is that there's room for us all, that He's made margin and space for all of our gifts. And He wants us to do the same. And if you're nodding your head and you're ready to put that community over competition attitude into action, I invite you to visit matthewclark.net/partner to give a one-time gift to Matthew, or consider becoming a monthly patron. Now, there's some rewards to these things, but most of all, I hope that you'll relish this opportunity to sow into somebody else that's just like you, trying to share their art and something beautiful with this world that points everyone back to Christ. That's what I hope to do here with this podcast. You might also consider hosting Matthew for a concert in your living room or your backyard. Now, let me tell you, if I can host one in my rented home, in my living room, anybody can. So don't feel intimidated. And should you ever find yourself in Memphis, Tennessee on the last Saturday of the month, please message me at lampburnersguild@gmail.com and let me know you want to join us. I'd be happy to oblige. See you next time, and don't forget to burn bright.